Week 8 is almost here. We are going to break down all the starts and sits in every single Week 8 matchup. There are no teams on bye this week. We have got a lot to talk about, Cameron. Well, welcome into today's episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. First, I am back. It has been a minute. Lucas Wenzel, Cameron Lawrence hanging out with you on this episode. As I said, every start, sit decision in every Week 8 matchup. How many players are we talking about today, Cameron?
I think at least 32.
At least 32, because there are 32 NFL teams playing this week. If you're not subscribed to the podcast already, make sure you do that. Turn on those notifications as well, so you know when all of our new episodes are up. Same with the YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed over there, we would appreciate you if you subscribe to the channel. Turn on those notifications so you know when all of our podcast episodes are up, all of our YouTube videos are up, all of our YouTube shorts are up, everything of the sorts you will be notified of. Make sure you're following. Make sure you turn on those notifications so you don't miss out on anything. That's long enough of an intro. I think I went too long with that intro. Let's we got so many starts and decisions to dive into, Cameron. Let's dive on in to every Week 8 matchup. So we are going to start on Thursday night football, and we are going to work our way through darn near every single player in the National Football League. Let's do it. We're going to dive in. We'll start on Thursday night. We'll work our way all the way down to Monday Night Football. But first, Thursday Night Football between the Bucs and the Bills. Obviously, in this game, we're not going to overthink it. You're starting Josh Allen. You're starting Stephon Diggs. At this point, James Cook is an every week start as well. The top 12 running back on the year. You're starting Mike Evans. I'm curious, Chris Godwin. I like the matchup. Is he? Do you think at this point he's a must start in people's lineups?
I think he has to be, just because he's seen 10 targets a week over the last 3 weeks, right? He's getting that elite usage again. He hasn't scored touchdowns, so that's the reason, we have there's that separation fantasy point wise between him and Evans. But I don't want to say he's due, right? You could have said that all last year with Deontay Johnson, and he never got due. But I think Godwin is a good enough wide receiver to find the end zone. And he's getting the usage right now, where I think you have to put him in the starting lineup.
One of the, I do agree. I think the volume alone, Chris Godwin just has to be in your lineup. Guy he's been getting some volume, hasn't really done much with it. Rachaad White. Do you think this is a sneaky good matchup for him?
I think so. Bills are giving up the 5th most points to running backs over the last 4 weeks. I think at this point of the year, we kind of shift a little bit. Sometimes we use full year for defensive statistics. Sometimes we use 4 weeks, just because trends do change. Defenses change. We saw that last year, like with the Lions. First half of the year, they were the worst rush defense we've maybe seen other than this Denver team this year. Second half of the year, they started to correct them. So just looking at the trend, giving up the 5th most points. They're allowing 7 targets a game over that stretch and 4.6 yards per carry. Obviously, like you said, Rachaad White hasn't done much with his snaps, but knowing that receiving work is such a big part of his game, hopefully he can find some efficiency in this game. I do think it's a sneaky good matchup for him.
Well, and we thought it wasn't that great of a matchup for him last week, and there he goes out and puts up nearly 16 fantasy points and has himself an all right week. So as long as Rachaad White's involved in the active, or as long as he's actively involved in the passing game, I would agree. I think he can safely be in your lineup against the Buffalo Bills. Yeah, their defense has been struggling. They've also been struggling to put up points on defenses as well. The Giants, they couldn't put up points against. They took a bad loss to the Patriots this last week. I think 2 guys on the outside kind of looking in, Dalton Kincaid and Gabe Davis. You have any interest in playing either of them this week?
Not really. I think Kincaid, it's hard to say sit a tight end, right? Just because they're so low. And Kincaid, I think, is one of the few tight ends who could pop off for a 20-point week. But the Bucs have been very good against tight ends. They've held Goddard, Taysom Hill, Sam Laporta, and Kyle Pitts to single-digit PPR fantasy points over the last 4 weeks. Like, that's a pretty good group. I know Taysom probably doesn't belong in that group necessarily, but Goddard, Laporta, Pitts is a good group to hold the single digits. So it will be a tough matchup. I don't know if he's necessarily a sit, depending on your team situation, right? I wouldn't go pick up another tight end to try to start over him. But if you do have 2 options, I would stay away from Dalton Kincaid. And we've talked about Gabe Davis a lot of, if you really want that boom bust on the end of your lineup and you're really struggling to find a player, but with no teams on bye this week, I would probably steer clear of Gabe Davis.
Bucs have been getting better against outside wide receivers this year as well. You look at their metrics, I believe over the last 4 weeks, they've held outside wide receivers to right around 300 receiving yards. So pretty dang good.
Yeah.
I'm not too interested in Gabe Davis nor Dalton Kincaid either this week. We'll keep it moving here, though. There are a few obvious starts here in our next matchup and a few interesting guys that we maybe want to talk about. The New York Jets visit the New York Giants. You're obviously you're starting Saquon Barkley, Darren Waller, Breece Hall in this game. Jets are allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to running backs this year. They are currently actually allowing the most fantasy points per game to tight ends this year. So these are great matchups for both Saquon Barkley, Darren Waller. Then you look at the Giants, second most rush yards, third most rush touchdowns this year. And the Giants are allowing 5 yards per carry to backs this year. Oh my gosh, that is the third most. Breece is going to have himself a week. We'll talk sneak peek. We'll talk a little bit more about him later. You're firing those 3 up. No questions asked. Let's start with the sits, though. No Giants wide receivers at all. Like, I'm not interested in a Wandale, a Darius Slayton, nobody this week. I assume you're not either.
No, Ty talked about a couple weeks ago picking up Wandale Robinson, but this is not the matchup to try and start and have him figure it out. And Jets have been very good against wide receivers.
Very, very good against wide receivers. So really, the only other guy I want to look at in this matchup, I don't want to think about Daniel Jones. He might not even play in this matchup. Lord knows we're not going to talk about Zach Wilson. So really the only guy left on the table to talk about that isn't a must start or a must sit at this point is Garrett Wilson. Mm-hmm. You have any interest in Garrett Wilson this week? The Giants currently kind of middle of the pack against wide receivers, 13th in fantasy points per game, 10th in receiving yards, 11th in reception. So they're not like this like dream juicy matchup that you're like desiring to get Garrett Wilson into. But at the same time, it could be a whole heck of a lot worse. So what do you do with Garrett Wilson this week?
He, for me, is still in the same realm. I've kind of had him in since Aaron Rodgers went down. He's a mid-level to probably lower-level wide receiver 2 rest of the season. I think you can kind of look at that pretty much every game unless it's just one of those awful matchups.
Right.
And he's a guy, he could see 14 targets and catch 6 of them and get you 55 yards. And you're like, well, I mean, it was good enough. I think that's kind of how he's going to be rest of the season is it's good enough. You're probably never going to feel like, man, I guess I shouldn't say never, but you're probably not going to feel like, that sucked. But you're probably never like, oh, yay, Garrett Wilson brought me 30. I don't think that's going to happen either.
No. I mean, considering he hasn't scored, his season high was 17 before the bye in week 6. 8 targets, 9 targets, 14 targets, 7 targets, 12 targets. That's from week 2 to 6. So he's getting the volume. Mm-hmm. The problem is that he doesn't even have a top 15 wide receiver finish on the season on a weekly basis. So I don't hate the matchup with the Giants. Look, at the end of the day, you're probably going to slot Garrett Wilson in to your lineup because you drafted him, as a wide receiver 2, perhaps even your wide receiver 1 for your team. So you're probably kind of forced into starting him. But if you ended up acquiring better options along the way, at the very least, Garrett Wilson is a strong flex option this week. I think I don't know if I'm willing to put him as a wide receiver 2, but based on volume alone, he might just be.
Yeah.
We'll move it on. Not too many other places to talk about in that matchup. Jacksonville, they visit the Pittsburgh Steelers. You're starting ETN, who, my goodness, has been on fire. Now I'm curious. You put both Deontay Johnson and George Pickens here as must starts or as obvious starts, if you will. What's your logic behind that? Because I'm not sure I entirely agree. I think I'd look other ways other than Deontay or Pickens if need be. I'll say this: the matchup is fine. Against Jacksonville. I'm not worried about the matchup. I'm more so worried about Kenny Pickett and can they both eat in this offense?
Yeah, I did put him as obvious. We have the categories as obvious must starts. I was just more throwing them in as starts. We have a code in our doc where you put a question mark if someone that you're not quite sure if they should actually be there, and these two should have that question mark on there, right? I think Deontay for me is going to be looked at as a wide receiver, like a real high-end flex, real low-end wide receiver rest of the season, just because when he's on the field, he gets the volume. And the way Pickens has been playing with no Freiermuth, I do think you should start him. But I will agree, I don't think they're necessarily obvious must starts. But if they're your wide receiver 3 on your team, I do think they should be in your lineup this week.
Yeah, I mean, it is encouraging to see George Pickens 5 receptions, 170 yards, even with Deontay Johnson back in the lineup. Deontay obviously 5 for 79 on what do you play? 50 sorry, well, I
66%
right here. 66, thank you. Yeah, I mean, and that's encouraging to see in and of itself. So I think there's room for both. I don't know if I'm like forcing their way in, but I think they are both very okay flex options this week. In terms of starts, Who would pick one of the Jacksonville wide receivers to start this week? Because it hasn't been good for Calvin Ridley. Christian Kirk has been on fire, but again, this is a very good matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, so I will say I think Calvin Ridley probably falls closer to the George Pickens range. I think they are probably pretty close. I would absolutely be starting Christian Kirk. Pittsburgh is allowing the most points to slot wide receivers by 17% is what I put, but it's like 7 more points per game to slot wide receivers the last 4 weeks than the next closest team. Kirk himself is averaging 9 targets a game and hasn't had a single digit PPR game since week 1. When we were all panicking and thought the sky was falling for Christian Kirk. I mean, he's been the go-to guy. And so if there's anyone in this matchup, he probably should have been the obvious start. Let's be honest. The way he's been playing, he should have been the obvious start. But yeah, he should definitely be in your lineup this week.
So why isn't Calvin Ridley in the obvious start conversation then?
So me and Ty talked about this on Tuesday. I don't feel like he is an obvious start moving forward, just because
I agree.
He's had over 50% of his points in 2 games this year. In week 1 and I think it was week 5, he's averaging 22 points per game. And every other week he's averaging under 7. It's just, I mean, and this is the matchup. Like, if you're going to start him, this is probably the matchup to start him. But if, like we're talking Garrett Wilson earlier, I'm starting Garrett Wilson over Calvin Ridley this week.
I think I would too.
Yeah.
Which sucks.
Yeah, man, it does.
I wish I had a list of name games ready to go for Calvin Ridley, because I agree. I don't think Calvin Ridley needs to be locked into your lineup. Now, is this the matchup to play him? Is he going to have a better matchup than other guys you're probably comparing him against? Yes. So are you going to start Calvin Ridley? Yeah, you're probably going to. But man, if it's not this week, I don't know what week it's going to be, because we have given Calvin Ridley more than enough chances this year. And he did it in week 1, and he did it against the Bills in London. I don't know how much more we could be waiting on Calvin Ridley here before we accept that he just needs to find his way onto your bench. But again, this is the matchup to probably start Calvin Ridley, and if he is going to have a big bounce back week. Let's talk about guys who are probably going to fall off this week, though, because I think Najee Harris, he's going to run to a brick wall here. Look, my big problem with last week, I don't want to take away when a guy does good. I feel like I've been doing that a lot recently. But Najee's 15.7 fantasy points, season high. God, nice little boost from a 6-point rushing touchdown as well. So would have been single digits again without that touchdown. I'm okay if you have options other than Najee you want to play this week.
Yeah, I would agree. He's, like you said, he's a single digit guy without a touchdown. And if we're going to bet on Najee Harris scoring a touchdown every single week, I'm going to take the under every single time. And so you're assuming then he's a single digit guy every single week. And that's not a guy I want plugged in as my running back too, or even my flex.
No. And the problem is that he's just not getting the snaps either. He's not getting the work in the receiving game. Jaguar. I mean, Najee Harris has been inefficient as it is. And the Jaguars, 10th fewest yards per carry allowed to backs this year. Not a great situation for Najee to step into here. If you have other options you can look at, I would be very okay if you pivoted to a different option. We'll keep it rolling here. I lost my spot. Here we go. Philadelphia. They visit the Washington Commanders this week. Long list of guys you're obviously starting here. Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, who has been en fuego. He has been on fire recently. He has to be in your lineup. DeAndre Swift as well. He's just double digit. Yeah, basically the Eagles. But I think it's worth talking about Devonta Smith, because Devonta 100%. Smith, he's the wide receiver 29 in PPR formats this year. However, since week 3, he's been the wide receiver 50. The last time he scored double digits was week 4 against Washington, and it wasn't anything all that special. In Washington, they're currently allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers, the 2nd most receiving yards. So, can you are you starting Devonta Smith? I guess there's no other way of asking that, because I'm terrified too, but I have to, because the matchup is there and I know his talent.
Yeah, I feel like he got to start him this week, but I unfortunately feel like he's probably in that Garrett Wilson, Calvin Ridley conversation.
Yes.
And that breaks my heart, the fact that he is there right now. But a big part of it is like what you said earlier, is Dallas Goedert's been playing amazing. Dallas Goedert's been catching everything thrown his way. And this team throws the ball a decent amount, but I don't know if they throw it enough to have 3 elite targets, especially with the way A.J. Brown's been playing. However, if he's on your team, I feel like you got to start him this week against Washington.
I would 100% agree. How about Terry McLaurin on the other side of the football? Obviously, we're not even going to think about Jahan Dotson
Mm-mm.
or Logan. No, I guess how have the Eagles been against tight ends this year? I haven't taken a look.
They have
I know
been
they
pretty
got torched
good.
at the beginning of the year. Yeah, they've buckled it up here over the course
Mhm.
of the year. Yeah, the Eagles have gotten a lot better against tight ends this year.
Yeah, 5 points per
So
game over the last 4 games. The
yep, yeah,
Titans.
they have been playing great. So we're not going to talk about Logan Thomas. Terry McLaurin is the only other option I even want to consider here. You looking to start Scary Terry this week? He's seen 9+ targets in 3 of the last 4 weeks. Last time he played Philadelphia in week 4, put up a season high 22.6 fantasy points. You starting Scary Terry this week?
I think you have to. They just traded for Kevin Byard, the Eagles did, but he's not, that's not going to fix the defense this week.
Right.
It's going to take a little bit for them to mesh. And like you said, 9+ targets in 3 of the last 4 weeks. The targets are coming for Terry now. And so, yeah, I think you got to keep riding the hot hand, especially against a defense that is really struggling against wide receivers.
Yeah, and the Eagles are allowing 43.13 fantasy
Oh.
points per game to the position this year. That is the second most in the league. So, yeah, I think you got to fire up Scary Terry this week. I think he could be in for a big week. And speaking of guys who aren't going to be in for big weeks, I think you and I can both agree
Mhm.
Brian Robinson could take a seat this week. His usage is just rapidly
Oh, it's
declining.
disgusting.
It's alarming. He hasn't seen more than 10 rushing attempts in a game since week 4. Hasn't played more than 55% of the snaps since week 1. That is absolutely alarming to me. Philly, obviously, very stout against the run. I want to triple check this stat before I bring it up, but I'm pretty sure the Eagles are allowing the fewest. They're allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to running backs this year over the last 4 weeks. Excuse me. On the year, though, they are indeed allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. And I know Brian Robinson had a nice week in week 4 against the Eagles, but let's put odds on it.
Yeah.
Ati replicates that performance. I think you and I both agree he's a sit, but Ati replicates that.
Oh, man. I would be like,
I'd say 10%.
yeah, it's real low. I mean, the Eagles give up 2 rushing touchdowns all year. So if you think they're going to give a third to the same guy, it's
Yeah.
not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen. We'll keep it moving. So you're going to start Devonta Smith and Terry McLaurin. You're going to sit Brian Robinson. Otherwise, you're starting all of your other Eagles players per usual. The Rams, they visit the Dallas Cowboys this week. You're starting Cooper Kupp, starting CeeDee Lamb, you're starting Tony Pollard, Puka Nacua coming off of a massive week. You're firing him up as well. What do we want to do with these Los Angeles Rams running backs, though? It's kind of a gross hodgepodge. Darrell Henderson, he's back actually down on the practice squad, but they could bring him back up. You have Royce Freeman still around.
Mm.
I don't know. Could they bring in another guy this week? What do you want to do with these Rams running backs this week? Because I really don't want to play either of them, considering neither of them gave me really fabulous output last week.
Yeah, Darrell Henderson going to the practice squad was a procedural move. From what I've seen, more about a contract than
Yes.
he's been demoted. I do want to. I've seen that in our TikTok comments, our YouTube comments. I do want to dispel that. But yeah, Sean McVay has talked about Zach Evans and Myles Gaskins might be more involved this week. And if we're talking about a 4-headed monster going up against the team that's allowing the 5th least amount of rushing yards a game, and none of them are going to have receiving upside, that's a no from me on all fronts. I don't want any part of it. I don't want to try to guess what the split's going to be this week. I'm staying away from the Rams running backs, and I got on my 3 redraft teams, I got a Rams running back on each of them, and I'm not touching. I'm not touching them this week.
Yep. No, I have a few shares of Royce Freeman, and he is not touching my lineup in any platform this week. One Cowboy we didn't talk about though, Jake Ferguson. What do we want to do with Jake this week? I think he could be a decent little tight end streamer if you need him to this week. The Rams, a little bit of a soft spot for tight ends, but yeah, what do you want to do with Jake Ferguson this week?
I would agree. I think he's a streamer. Ty talked about it in the waiver wire video that he did on YouTube on Monday, and I think I agree. Rams are giving the 7th most points to tight ends, and they gave up 80+ yards to the tight end position 3 weeks in a row before last week. And last week they played Connor Hayward was the only tight end they played against, who's not exactly a receiving threat in his own right. So yeah, they've definitely been soft. And Dak, he's shown over his career that he likes throwing to the tight end position. So if we're going to bank on someone not named CeeDee Lamb to score a receiving touchdown, it's probably Jake Ferguson this week.
It could be Jake Ferguson this week. CeeDee Lamb finds the end zone against the Rams. I would not be surprised in the least. But again, you're obviously firing up CeeDee Lamb. Let's move on to the Minnesota Vikings. They visit the Green Bay Packers this week. You're obviously firing up TJ Hawkinson. Dare I say he's the only player that I feel like you're obligated to start in this matchup?
Yes, 100%.
Because how do you feel about Aaron Jones? I put Aaron Jones on our list. I put him with a question mark. I feel like, again, I feel like he's one of those guys where you drafted him and you're probably needy at the running back position, so you're probably going to play him. But I question if he's still fully healthy. He was still limited in snaps last week, so maybe that'll change this week. But I don't know. Like, what do you do with Aaron Jones this week?
That's exactly it. If he's fully healthy and playing, he probably have a great week. If he's on a limited snap count again, where he plays less than AJ Dillon, who has not been great this season, it's probably not going to be pretty. But like you said, you're probably starting him no matter what, because you just might not have any other options.
Right. So then let's another guy I want to talk about. I don't know if he's a mandatory start. I'm pulling up some numbers here just to make sure I have them right. Yeah, Jordan Addison coming off of a massive week. I feel some people are just going to be like, nope, he's a lead target guy. He's going to be in my lineup now. No questions asked. I don't know, man. Green Bay is pretty good against wide receivers this year. They are currently allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers this year, or the 5th fewest fantasy points total, to wide receivers this year. Only 763 receiving yards allowed. That is the 4th fewest this year. Are you willing to play Jordan Addison just because he's the number 1 in Minnesota? No questions asked. Do you have your reservations? I feel like part of me is like, I feel like you just got to play him.
Yeah, I'm starting him in the league that I have him in. My team is a little more wide receiver needy, I will admit, in the league that I'm starting him in. But I do feel like he's probably a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end flex option this week with no Justin Jefferson.
How about Alexander Mattison, another guy that I have no clue what to do with, because Green Bay, you can beat them on the ground. Swiss cheese run defense. 3rd most fantasy points per game to running backs. 5 running backs have scored 12 plus this year. 4 have scored 17 plus. Obviously, we saw he got out-touched by Cam Akers last week. So what do you do if you're a Madison manager? Because this would be the game that he bounces back in. But is this the game that Cam Akers actually takes over in because it's such a good matchup?
Yeah, and Madison's been leading in snap count, but Cam Akers actually led in carries last week, which was a little bit surprising, especially the way that Madison started that game. But man, I don't know. I don't want to.
No, I don't either.
If you are holding on to Madison and not looking to trade him, then you probably should start him, because that means you believe in him. And like you said, this is the matchup that you would start him in then.
Yeah. And frankly, teams that I see that still have Alexander Mattison are playing him are frankly just needy at the running back position. So that is you got to play Madison, and this isn't a bad matchup to try and take advantage of.
Yes.
I'll just throw it out there. I'm going to sit KJ Osborne and Brandon Powell this week. I know they both had decent weeks, but let's not overcomplicate this. It's not like they've been anything special. This isn't the matchup you want to start them in. Can we just move on from that? Those are the 2 I'm looking to sit this week. Christian Watson might be a sit as well. He injured his knee on the final drive of this past Sunday's game, so we'll keep track of that throughout the week. But what do you want to do? I'll say this. I'll make the case for Romeo Doubs to be a start this week. That's what I'll do. Against the Minnesota Vikings, 4th most fantasy points per game allowed to wide receivers. If Christian Watson is out, I think Romeo Doubs is a sneaky mega start this week. You look at games without Watson this year, he's averaging 14 fantasy points per game. I think this is a matchup where the Green Bay Packers could take advantage of the Minnesota Vikings secondary. And if there's no Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs is clearly the guy. You have any interest in Doubs if Watson does indeed miss this week? Again, we'll keep track of the injury. This is all speculation. We're posting this on a Thursday. They still have Thursday practice reports and Friday practice reports to be released. We're speculating a little bit prematurely here. But if Christian Watson is out, do you think Romeo Doubs has a chance at actually solid relevance this week?
I think so. And I think, honestly, he should be in a Calvin Ridley discussion if no Christian Watson this week. That's at the point where Calvin Ridley's at. I don't know if I'd have the cojones necessarily to start Doubs over Calvin Ridley, but I do think he at least deserves to be in that discussion with no Christian Watson.
I sneaky agree with that. I think Doubs could be in for a sneaky, very nice week. Find the end zone even if Christian Watson is indeed out. Let's talk 2 more matchups and take a quick break, Cameron. Atlanta at Tennessee. What do we? Oh my gosh, I hate this is the worst matchup to talk about this week.
It's so gross.
This is the worst matchup. Bijan Robinson had himself a nice little headache last week, decided to be funny to play a practical joke on fantasy managers and, play a snap. I don't know. I'm not feeling great. Then coming at the end, I just wasn't feeling that great.
Mhm.
What the crap you do with Bijan this week? He's not even that great of a matchup.
Yeah, I feel like you got to start him. I mean, from where you drafted him, you got to start him, and the talent he has. I don't know if you heard the quote from Arthur Smith, but he said we're
Oh
going to
my
run the hot
gosh.
hand rest of the season. Sometimes it could be Tyler Algier. Sometimes they'll say, hey, maybe we should give CPAT some more carries this game. I just don't want you getting upset at me about your fantasy team anymore because that's how we're going to play it. But if they're playing the hot hand, that means they should play Bijan every single snap.
Every single
So
snap.
I'm gonna start Bijan every single week, but yeah, it is definitely. I mean, Arthur Smith's got to be the most frustrating coach. He has passed Kyle Shanahan from a fantasy perspective.
Yes, I would 100% agree with that statement, and I would agree you probably should still play Bijan this week. I assume you still want to play Derrick Henry. It's again, Derrick Henry is just a headache and a half. Falcons actually have been decently good against running backs this year. I assume you still got to fire up Derrick Henry. Go again. It's a draft capital thing. You really can't afford to bench him.
Yeah, he's so I found a surprising stat. He's the I think he's 4th in yards per carry since week 4. 5.6 yards per carry. Yeah, I was shocked by that stat. But yeah, you got to start him. I would be shocked if with Will Levis or maybe Malik Willis starting this game if Derrick Henry's under 20 carries because they're just going to have to rely on the run game because the passing game is going to be so gross.
Yeah, if I do remember the report from today, it is Will Levis starting at quarterback this week, and
we might could even see be both like, though.
Yeah, we could see both. Right? It's who is it? Matt Harmon then posted the Office clip of oh shoot, why can't I remember? There was an Office clip they pulled up, but basically it was this whole analogy of like, oh yeah, United States has never failed with 2 presidents. And this whole analogy, gosh, why can I not remember the guy's name from The Office? That's going to bug me. But Matt Harmon posted a hilarious meme on it. I got a very, very good laugh out of that. But yeah, I think you just have to start Derrick Henry. You're forced to. I don't want to talk about. I hate trying to talk myself into starting Atlanta Falcons, but this is a really good Drake London matchup.
Yeah.
You want to make the case?
Yeah, 6+ receptions in each of the last 3 weeks. The 7th worst secondary so far this year from a fantasy point perspective, and they just traded away their best player in the secondary. So if there's any week to start them, right, it's got to be this week. And they've been throwing the ball a little bit more. Hopefully, if Bijan's not running as much, they're throwing the ball to Drake London. But yeah, I think he could finish as a low end wide receiver 2 this week.
With the hot hand he's had, I think you have to put him into your lineup. I do agree he is a start this week. How about DeAndre Hopkins on the other side of the football, though? Because I mean, that's really the only wide receiver we're interested in. Do you have any interest in DeAndre Hopkins this week with Banana Boy Levis at quarterback?
Yeah, I think that's all you need to hear is that Will Levis playing quarterback. So no.
Yeah, Banana Boy, Mayo and Coffee Levis is on the field today. On the field,
biggest slide history.
Yeah, I would agree. I would avoid playing DeAndre Hopkins with him at quarterback. All right, let's one more match before we take a break. The Patriots visit the Miami Dolphins. Look, Tyreek Hill listed as questionable for this game. Sounds like he might not actually play this week, but if he does, you're obviously starting him. Jalen Waddle is a must start no matter what. Raheem Mostert also listed as questionable. Not sure what his status is, but yeah, the injury bug has caught up to Miami, but that's one to keep track of because then Jeff Wilson may all of a sudden become in play this week. But I think you have to start Ramondre as well. He's been heavily involved in the passing attack, at least 6 targets the past 2 weeks. I think he's in your lineup automatically. Don't worry about it. I don't want to play anybody else in this game. I really don't.
I don't blame you.
I got a case typed out on our doc for Kendrick Bourne. I don't want to tell people to play Kendrick Bourne, but look, if you need a break the glass flex option, if you need a guy fresh off the waiver wire that can just be thrown into your lineup because you are the most desperate person in the world and need a wide receiver in your lineup, I'll make the case for you. In games where he's played 90+% of the snaps, he's been a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy football. He scored 19.3, 16.3 over the last 2 weeks. Miami, they're allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to wideouts this year. So I don't know. There's your case. I accumulated a nice pile of stats for you that could talk you into it. So you could pray on your hands and knees that Kendrick Bourne plays 90% of the snaps and has himself a nice week. But I frankly would not force him into your lineup at all whatsoever. Everybody else can find their way out to your bench as far as I'm concerned. So Do you have anything you want to add there? Because I don't want to talk about this matchup. The two gross matchups before going into the break.
Yeah, I will say I'm starting Kendrick Bourne in a dynasty league, and my other
Attaboy.
options are Brian Robinson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Mingo, Darnell Mooney, or Treylon Burks. So
Yeah, I would
that's the
agree.
that's like the where he's in. It's not like I'm
Yes.
deciding between him and Garrett Wilson. It's definitely a break the glass in case of emergency option.
Yes, 100% agree. Couldn't have said it better myself. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with more matchups. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100. Alrighty, we are back, and we are going to continue flying through these matchups because, man, we still have a lot to talk about. And we still have the fellas full fade or the fellas full play because we've been on fire recently. We'll get to that at the end of the episode. But New Orleans, they visit Indianapolis Colts this week. Look, you're starting Chris Olave, even though he got arrested this week. Like, he'll be fine.
He'll be there.
This is just gonna say this is Jordan Addison all over again. You're starting Michael Pittman. You're starting off Kamara. They all have been red hot recently.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Thomas, I think you can play him if you need to. I think you can slot him in. Jonathan Taylor, you're obviously starting Jonathan Taylor, even though it's a tough matchup against.
That was one I forgot. There it is.
Yeah, no, you're good. I'm like, I didn't put his name on there, but Jonathan Taylor, you're going to play him, even though it's a tough matchup with the New Orleans Saints. What do we do with Josh Downs? Coming off of a hot week, part of me is like, let's ride the hot hand. Gardner Minshew clearly loves him.
Mm-hmm.
Are you willing to play him this week?
Yeah, I would continue to ride with Josh Downs. I actually like Josh Downs more than I like Michael Thomas in this matchup,
Sure.
just because how well he's been playing, especially with Gardner Minshew. Saints are giving up 17 points per game to slot wide receivers this season, and Downs plays 83% of his snaps in the slot. So, that helps. And then he's coming off 3 straight games, also with 5+ receptions, and he's seen 16 points per game with Gardner Minshew this year. So, yeah, I'm riding with Josh Downs.
How about Zach Moss? He's the other Colt that's probably of somewhat relevance in this game. Floating around relevance a little bit, but is this a game? I think this is a game that his last bit of value potentially gets killed off.
Yeah, if you're like me, where you've been sucking out every last little bit of value from Zach Moss at the end of your last flex spot, this is probably the week where the magic runs out. They've held all running backs under 65 yards this season, and he's not the primary back. Jonathan Taylor is definitely taking over that role. So I do think this is the end of probably the beginning of the end of the Zach Moss magic.
I would agree with you there. We'll keep it moving. We don't need to break that one down too much more. The Houston Texans take on the Carolina Panthers. You're starting Adam Thielen. He has been just red hot. He cannot stop getting basically all the volume in the world for the Carolina Panthers. CJ Stroud, are you willing to stream him this week? I'm forced into it because I have Justin Fields sitting out, and he was the best option on the waiver wire. I see CJ Stroud as more of a stream this week, but I'd be willing to play him. I guess I'm worried Dameon Pierce might just have himself a really nice day for once.
Yeah, well, we'll see, because Devin Singletary out carried him in the last game, so we have no idea what's happening in the backfield.
That's very
true. I think CJ Stroud could definitely have himself a good game. He's been playing real well against defenses that have been great against the pass. I'm also starting him in a league where I have Deshaun Watson, so I do think that's kind of where he is. He's probably at the fringe top 12 kind of guy on the week.
Yeah, I feel fine playing CJ Stroud this week, but he's not a guy I'm like trying to force into a top 10 option or anything like that. Let's see. Let's talk about his pass catchers, though. Nico Collins, man, he is on fire. What are you doing with Nico this week? I feel like he's a very strong start against the Panthers.
Yeah, I mean, it's an even week, so I'm just kidding. But Carolina's given up the 5th most points outside wide receivers of the last 4 weeks. And Nico has 4 games this season with 80+ yards playing on the outside. He actually exploited the Steelers when they played him from the slot, but he's mainly an outside guy. and they're giving up the seventh. Carolina's giving up the seventh most points per reception in that same stretch, and Nico is averaging almost 19 yards per reception. So, if there's a deep guy right now, it's Nico Collins against a secondary that's struggling. So I would be definitely firing up Nico Collins.
Miles Sanders, I don't want to touch him. I assume you don't either.
No, not at all. Struggling with that injury, and Houston's been good against the run. So
there we go. That's the only two things you need to know. I would avoid playing Miles Sanders this week. We'll move on. Cleveland, my goodness, it's the NBA season. Almost had the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cleveland Browns. My goodness, almost so sports on us. Cleveland Browns, they visit the Seattle Seahawks. I'm going to be honest. The only obvious guy in this matchup for me is Ken Walker, and I still don't like the matchup. Because, I mean, DK Metcalf, maybe if he's back.
Yeah, I think
he's
you have
about
to
the only other one.
Back, but yeah, I would agree. Right. It's going to be gross.
It's going to be gross. So the other guys we look at here, let's stick with the other Seattle pass catchers. How about Tyler Lockett? You have any interest in playing him this week? I'm actually pretty out on Tyler Lockett at this point.
I think if DK is back, I'm not going to try and pick, especially this week between him, Lockett, or him, JSN, and then even Jake Bobo, who's kind of
Bobo, baby, yeah,
kind of come up. I don't want to play that game. I think it's DK, or you're playing a very dangerous game, especially against this defense.
I would 100% agree. You look at his Lockett snap shares as well. Over the last 3 weeks, they really haven't hit above 80% versus in weeks 1 through 3. He was hovering right in that 81 to 88% range, and Cleveland obviously very good against the pass this year. The fewest fantasy points per game allowed to wide receivers. Let's flip the ball, though, because I think the same argument would apply for JSN, Jake Bobo, etc. Mm-hmm. How about Amari Cooper? You have any interest in Amari Cooper this week? Sounds like Deshaun Watson is going to be out. PJ Walker is going to draw the start. We just got that news this afternoon on Wednesday. How do you feel about Amari Cooper this week?
I don't know. I feel like you got to start him, but we've seen the last 2 weeks, last week was terrible, and the week before he was pretty good. Seattle is giving up a lot of points to the wide receiver position, I know, but I think you got to start him. But at the same time, I'd kind of close my eyes and cross my fingers.
Well, he's one. He's in that Garrett Wilson Calvin Ridley range for me as well. That's where I think he falls in this week because again, he's seeing the volume. The quarterback play isn't going to be there though, but it's a great match with Seattle, 4th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this year. Kareem Hunt listed as questionable, struggling with an injury at practice this week. Jerome Ford, he's likely out 1 to 2 weeks. You have any interest in Kareem Hunt? I mean, I think if he plays, I'm semi-interested, but at this point, I don't think I'd force him in either.
Yeah, I don't know. He would be one where if you got like Alexander Madison, that would be where I'm starting to go, ooh, which way do I go here? Obviously, Jerome Ford has to be out. Jerome Ford plays, and I'm probably going to lean Madison. But, I mean, yeah, he could probably sneak into, that mid running back 2 range, which this year is not hard to hit. It's like, that's like scoring 12 points in a game.
Right.
But it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be pretty even if he gets the majority of the work.
I would agree with that, and we'll keep him moving. Cincinnati Bengals, they visit the San Francisco 49ers. You're starting Jamar Chase. You're starting Joe Burrow. You're starting Christian McCaffrey. I think you're starting George Kittle just because of draft capital, and he's coming off of a nice game, 13 fantasy points against the Vikings. Brock Purdy and concussion protocol, though.
Yeah.
Just got that news this afternoon. That all of a sudden makes me question whether Brandon Ayuk should automatically be in your lineup this week. Do you really want to trust Sam Darnold? He's still the team's backup, right? They didn't cut him.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's Sam Darnold at quarterback potentially. I think I'm still going to play Brandon Ayuk. That's how I feel. The tone of my voice is exactly how I feel about it. If I'm not going to turn on the game, I'll put Brandon Ayuk in my lineup and pretend it's Brock Purdy back there still, and hope for the best.
We just keep adding guys to this tier. I mean, it's the same as the Amari Cooper tier of. Sam Darnold's proved that he's capable enough last year, right? I mean, to fill in, and this offense, we've seen it. It's, you could make not great quarterbacks look pretty great. So I would probably still start Ayuk, but like you said, I don't know if it's going to be too pretty.
How about T. Higgins? Fresh off the bye, has extended time to heal, rest up now. Before his injury in week 4, he saw 8+ targets in each of the first 3 weeks. I know I've been pretty anti-T. Higgins, but this is one of those matchups that I think this is like your last chance to buy low on T. Higgins because this is a great matchup against the 49ers this week.
Yeah, I also think, if T. Higgins is still on your team at this point, and right, you haven't moved off him, that means you believe in him at least somewhat. So I feel like you have to start him this week if you're trusting in T. Higgins, because like you said, this is probably going to be one of the best matchups he gets.
I 100% agree. San Francisco 10th most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers this year. That is their one defense,
Diced
or their
up on
one.
Monday.
Yeah, they got diced up by the Vikings. Embarrassing. Hold that L. Yeah, that is their one weakness on defense that you can exploit. You willing to sit Joe Mixon this week, or are you still willing to play him?
I mean, it'll depend. It's just, it depends what running backs you got. If you got two running backs, I'd probably sit them in favor of a wide receiver, as your flex play. But if you really need to start him, I mean, he's not going to be, I don't think he's going to kill you, but it's definitely going to be ugly.
I would agree. The problem is I want to say to sit Joe Mixon, but the problem is you probably don't have any other running back.
Running backs are so thin this year. I just don't know if you can.
Right, and that's the only problem. I would definitely dampen your expectations there. Let's move on. Kansas City Chiefs, they visit the Denver Broncos this week. Look, you're starting Mahomes, Kelsey. You're starting Isaiah Pacheco. I mean, anybody against the Broncos is an automatic start. How about Javonte Williams, though? Kansas City, pretty stout against the run. Javonte, kind of the clear guy. You got some Jaleel McLaughlin mixed in there too, but I'm pretty interested in sitting Javonte Williams. This is not the matchup I want to try and put him in my lineup.
Yeah, I think I would be starting Joe Mixon over Javonte Williams. I don't know if I'd really trust him this week. Kansas City's allowing the 5th least amount of points to running backs in the season. He's only got one double-digit half PPR. I don't know why I went half. We always talk PPR. I don't know why I went half on this one, but he's only got one double-digit half PPR game. And last week was his season high in snaps at 53%, which was shocking to me because, you think of him as the lead guy, but he just hasn't been with Jaleel McLaughlin now and Samaje Perine both rotating in. I think that's probably going to be the case at least this week because they are on bye next week. After the bye, it might start to change a little bit. They really might start to get him going more. But for this week against the Chiefs, I don't imagine them running the ball much on this team.
Let's talk wide receivers now. Frankly, I really don't want to play any of them. That's false. Maybe I'd be willing to play one or two of these guys, but basically the wide receivers we can choose to talk about here that are relevant are Rashee Rice, Courtland Sutton, and Jerry Jeudy. Rank those 3 for me this week.
I don't want to.
I mean, I don't either.
I did this so that you would rank them.
Yeah. Oh, okay, fine. I'll rank them. Then. I would play. I would go Sutton. I would go. Sutton's number 1 for sure.
Yeah, I feel like he has to be.
But then between Jerry Jeudy or Rashee Rice, I mean, Jerry Jeudy is going to get you 6 targets a game. He'll probably catch 4 of them for 40-something yards.
Yeah.
Basically, the question you're asking me is, do I think Rashee Rice gets in the end zone?
Yes, that's exactly it.
I think I would just rather take the guaranteed points with Jerry Jeudy if he's 6 targets, 5 receptions for 57 yards. I'll take my 10.7 and get out of there without worrying too much. But I will say this. I do love me some Rashee Rice, man. I was on him 3 weeks ago. His red zone targets were absolutely crazy for the snaps that he was playing. And what has he done the last 2-3 weeks now? All he's done is find the end zone. Mm-hmm. So if you're shooting for the upside, I think Rashee Rice has more upside than Jerry Jeudy. But I think Jerry Jeudy he has a safer floor. Yeah. So it really depends what you want for your matchup.
Yeah, I saw this. I just want to say this on Jerry Jeudy, just how disappointing it's been in this offense. He's a player profiler, has 50 stats, and he is top 35 in 2 of them. Target separation and slot snaps. So he's getting open from the slot where he should be feasting, and he's just not.
Where he should be getting open
and good. And it's just disappointing. He does have about the same target share as Courtland Sutton, which I thought was interesting, but Sutton is the one who finds the end zone, and obviously touchdowns are a lot more valuable than non-scoring touchdowns.
100% agree. Frankly, at the end of the day, the moral of the story is you really don't want to have to play any of them, but if you have to, that's the order we will play them in.
Yep.
Let's move on to Baltimore. They visit the Arizona Cardinals. You're starting Lamar Jackson. You're starting Mark Andrews. I'm firing up Zay Flowers this week. I think this is a great Zay Flowers matchup. Lamar is coming off of a red-hot game against the Detroit Lions. The Cardinals are allowing the most fantasy points per game, most receiving yards, and the most touchdowns to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. That is a smash start to me for Zay Flowers this week.
Yeah, I would agree.
What do you want to do on the other side of the ball? Marquise Brown, wide receiver 1 for the Arizona Cardinals. Baltimore's second fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. Came back down to earth a little bit here the past 2 weeks. What do you want to do with Hollywood?
I don't know.
I don't know.
He's better than the last 3 we talked about.
Yeah.
But man, he's probably a flex play this week. That's kind of where I would consider if you're short at the wide receiver position, you're probably starting him. If you got depth there, you're probably okay sitting him this week.
Yeah, I am sitting him in a league where I managed to accumulate AJ Brown, Amon-Ra, and Chris Olave. So in a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league, he is on my bench this week. But very typically, Marquise Brown was in my flex spot as my wide receiver 3 before I acquired Chris Olave. But yeah, I would be looking to sit him if you can this week. If you have to start him, I don't think it's like doom and gloom for Marquise Brown, because all it takes is one. All it takes is 1 catch for 40 something yards with him, and he gives you a 12-point day and you're fine. But yeah, I think he's a flex option this week. I'm not looking at him as a wide receiver 2 option. Amari DeMercado led the team in touches last week and production last week. You want to play him at all this week?
No, not really.
Yeah, I don't either. The problem is a lot of people are going to pick him up off the waiver wire, but I think he's best on your bench this week against the Ravens. I don't want to
agree.
I don't want to talk about him any more than that.
Nope.
Sunday Night Football, Chicago Bears. They visit the Los Angeles Chargers. What a great Sunday Night Football game. Maybe it'll be, I say that about all Bears games and they end up being okay. Look, the obvious players you're starting, Austin Eckler. One thing to know, this is interesting. I did not know this, Cameron. The Bears, they're top 10 rush defense over the last 4 weeks.
Yeah.
That's shocking to me, but you're going to fire up Eckler regardless. You're firing up Keenan Allen. You're playing Justin Herbert. You're playing DJ Moore. Let's talk Josh Palmer, though. You wanna play Josh Palmer this week against the Bears? Coming off a really nice game.
I don't, but I feel like he should. He's the Bears are allowing the 10th most points to the position over the season, right? They haven't been a great defense. They've kind of turned it around a little bit. It helps that they've played Vegas and the Commanders in 2 of their last 4 games. So I think that also helps why the rush defense has been better. But Palmer has only 3 less targets since week 4, the week after Mike Williams left, and 100 more yards than Keenan Allen in that time span. Really? So he's actually been the wide receiver 1 from a fantasy perspective over the last couple of weeks, which is crazy to me. I feel like if you want to win games, especially if you're Brandon Staley and you're on the hot seat, you would be getting to the ball to your best wide receiver at all costs. But I guess, you know what? Maybe not. Maybe you just, I have no idea. So I feel like you have to start Josh Palmer, probably fire him up, but I don't really want to. I just feel like you probably should.
Josh Palmer or Marquise Brown?
I think I'd go Josh Palmer.
I think I would as well. That's the tier that I'm looking at Josh Palmer in. Any sits that you want to really target this week? I mean, most of these guys, for the most part, it seems like it's a good matchup, and they're pretty obvious starts for the most part. You're obviously not forcing a Darnell Mooney in. You're not forcing a Quentin Johnston or Joshua Kelly in. Roschon Johnson still in concussion protocol. Deonta Foreman could have the backfield all to himself again this week. Here's what I'll say: if it's Deonta Foreman again this week, I'm not going to force him out of my lineup, but I'm also not going to force him into my lineup either.
Yeah. No, I would agree. If Roschon plays, I don't think I'd touch either of them. Deonta would, if he's by himself. I was surprised. Bears have given up the fewest rushing yards the last 4 weeks. Chargers have given up the 3rd fewest rushing yards. So 2 teams that, I just from the glancing at, I figured we're both bad against the run, but they've actually kind of buttoned it up a little bit over the last couple of weeks. And all the points against the Chargers fantasy wise come in the receiving game. So if it is between Roschon and Deonta, I don't want to try to guess, how it's going to split. But if it is Deonta, I do feel like he's probably going to be in that mid running back 2, status during this game.
Yep, I would agree with that. Let's wrap it up. Monday Night Football, the Las Vegas Raiders, they visit the Detroit Lions. I feel like we know who to start in this game.
Yeah.
I feel like everybody is a very clear start, and if there's any sort of question mark, you just don't play him. Because it's Amon-Ra, it's David Montgomery if he does suit up, it's Sam Laporta, it's Devontae Adams, and it's Josh Jacobs. Jacoby Myers, I actually think he's probably closer to a lineup lock than Jahmyr Gibbs is if David Montgomery plays this week. So you're playing him. And if David Montgomery's out, you're playing Jahmyr Gibbs because he scored nearly 28 fantasy points last week. Yeah. I don't know, do we need to overcomplicate this?
No, Detroit's the third worst team in fantasy points allowed to the wide receivers, and Vegas is ninth worst team in fantasy points allowed to running backs. So they're great matchups, and they're going to get volume. So I would agree. I think this one's pretty straightforward.
Well, there you go. Every start-sit decision across every single week 8 matchup this week. Timestamps will be on the video so you can cruise through those. But frankly, you're probably going to want to listen to all of them because it's like 3-minute blips. So you're going to miss it if you scroll too far. But anyways, every start-sit decision in every week 8 matchup. Cameron, let's close it out how we know how to do it best. The Fellas Full Fade. And really, it is not the Fellas Full Fade anymore because we have gone back-to-back weeks. We are now up 2 units on the season.
Yes, sir.
We put a unit on every play that we make. So we are now up 2 units on the season. Back-to-back wins. Huge money. But back-to-back wins, that'll do. It keeps you afloat. All it takes is one, which is the worst phrase to use in any sort of sports wagering in general. All it takes is one. But we have bounced back very nicely here over the last 2 weeks. So now it is truly up to you. In the past, we said, you know what? Just full fade it. We can't hit a pick to save our lives right now. Just full fade it. So now we'll leave it up to you. So maybe it's the Fellas Full Play, the Fellas Full Fade. I'll leave it up to you. Cameron, I'll let you kick us off here. Who is your pick over on Underdog Fantasy this week?
I talked about it in that Jags Steelers game. I'm going to take Christian Kirk higher than 53.5 receiving yards. Steelers are going up 200 yards to the wide receivers per game, which is second most in the NFL, and the most points to slot wide receivers the last 4 weeks. I don't want to overcomplicate this. He's the wide receiver to have in this offense against a really good matchup.
Christian Kirk higher than 53.5 receiving yards. That is locked into our first play over on Underdog Fantasy. I am going to go ahead. My pick. I feel like these are dangerous though, because when I scroll through and I see it, I'm like, yep, that one. And I want to play it. Sometimes it doesn't always pan out, but Breece Hall, 65.5 rushing yards is my pick this week, the higher on his rushing yards. A running back has topped this number against the New York Giants in every single game this year, except for last week when they played the Commanders. And we all know the Commanders' backfield is a disaster right now. The Giants, as I mentioned earlier, giving up 5 yards per carry. That is the 3rd most in the NFL this year. They are giving up the 2nd most rushing yards this year. And the Jets are coming fresh off of their bye. So Breece could be in for a massive week, get a majority of the workload. And I love his line at 65.5. I'm going to smash the I'm going to smash the higher there. Breece Hall higher than 65.5 rushing yards. That is indeed the pick. Our 2 picks. Christian Kirk higher than 53.5 receiving yards. Breece Hall higher than 65.5 rushing yards. You can plug those in if you want to play with us over on Underdog Fantasy. If you want to pick those 2 and you're a new user over there, you can use the code FELLAS when you sign up. They are going to give you a free square for this weekend slate. If you do it by Thursday Night Football, it's going to be Josh Allen on Thursday Night Football. I haven't checked who it's going to be for Sunday yet, but you will get a free square for Sunday's matchups if you sign up after Thursday Night Football as well. And they're going to give you a first deposit match up to $500. Again, over on Underdog Fantasy, you got to use the promo code FELLAS to sign up to get that free square. They're also going to double your first deposit up to $500. Cameron, anything you want to add before we close it out here?
No, just make sure you use the promo code FELLAS.
Make sure you use the promo code FELLAS and keep on fighting the good fight. We will see you next week. We'll be back with starts of the week tomorrow. We'll have waiver wire on Monday. Back with all of our week 8 reactions on Tuesday. I'm at Lucas Wenzel on Twitter. Camlaw FFF for Cameron. Make sure you subscribe, turn on those notifications for both podcasts and over on YouTube. We appreciate you supporting us all along the way here. We will see you next week on the podcast. Take care, stay safe. Until then, deuces.